In July of 1936, President Franklin Roosevelt issued a proclamation establishing the creation of Sumter National Forest in South Carolina. The protected land, which consists of over 370,000 acres, has no contiguous boundaries, but is instead divided into 3 unique ranger districts that span 11 of the state's counties and includes portions of the state's western mountainous terrain, as well as sections of the South Carolina Piedmont. Prior to the National Forest creation, much of the land was considered to be a plain rural upland with thorny fields and scrub woods, some of which had fallen victim to farming and heavy logging. Fortunately, through the efforts of the Civilian Conservation Corps and subsequent focus on proper land management, the Sumter National Forest is now a thriving habitat for wildlife and a popular destination for outdoor recreation. But according to local lore, the Sumter National Forest is home to more than just the beauty and splendor of the natural world. It is also believed to be home to the chilling apparition of a fearsome canine who hunts in the dark of the night, terrifying those who dare venture into the thick and isolated wilderness. He is known simply as the Ghost Hound of Goshen, and locals believe he has been present for almost 2 centuries, seeking vengeance for the death of the man to which he was once loyal. My name is Brandon Scheck-Snyder, and you are listening to Southern Gothic. In 1794, the South Carolina General Assembly approved funding for the construction of a road that would run west from the bustling port town of Charleston through the Carolina Mountains into Greenville, and then north toward the North Carolina city of Asheville. It was named Bumcombe Road, and as its construction was completed over the course of the following decades, it became an integral part of the expansion of the young state's economy, catalyzing the settlement of the western region of South Carolina. But in spite of Bumcombe Road's relatively heavy use by travelers and peddlers, it spanned incredibly isolated portions of the state, providing the perfect backdrop for a dark local legend. It is said sometime during the 1850s, an out-of-town salesman or peddler was traveling Bumcombe Road near Goshen Hill with his beloved pet, a massive white dog who served as both his companion and guardian. But at the time that they passed through this particular area, a crime was committed in the small community, and as an outsider, the salesman was immediately looked upon with suspicion. Some versions of this legend claim the crime was as serious as murder. Others, that it was either petty theft or something as trivial as gossip mongering. But whatever the reason, the result was the same, and the man was deemed responsible. So a mob was quickly formed to capture him. The salesman's dog attempted to protect its master as best it could, but it was driven off into the nearby woods with a gunshot that possibly even injured him, leaving the mob to do as they wished with the innocent traveler. So the man was hanged, and after his violent death, the mob left his lifeless body dangling from the tree. But then, after the men left the scene of the execution, the dog returned, dutifully standing guard. Some tellings of this legend claim that the dog stayed in place for weeks as his deceased master's body continued to hang and decompose in the elements, until eventually both he and the salesman's remains mysteriously disappeared. Other stories say that the dog eventually laid down and died of starvation, or that he barked and howled constantly for a week before a nearby resident came to the site and murdered him as well. But no matter how the story ends, from that day on, the ghost of this loyal companion began to prowl this 5-mile stretch of Old Bumcombe Road near Ebenezer Church in the Mabinton Township of Newberry County. And it is there that he is still believed to appear to travelers with his fiery red eyes and vicious snarl. The Ghost Hound of Goshen is described as a massive beast, often compared to the size and bulk of a St. Bernard or Mastiff. The canine has shaggy white hair and a mouth full of large teeth that, when pulled back into a snarl, gives the appearance of a, quote, toothy grin that Ernest Sheely, the former curator of the Newberry Museum, claims has resulted in the locals referring to the apparition as, quote, happy dog. However, very few, if any, published versions of this tale reference the ghost hound as this. What all do agree upon, though, is that the hound is the biggest, meanest dog one could ever encounter. And what is perhaps even more frightening is that many legends claim that the vicious ghost makes no noise as he prowls, save for the sound of his giant paws hitting the ground as he chases his prey. The first sighting of the Ghost Hound of Goshen is believed to have occurred in 1855, not long after the supposed hanging. An area resident named William Hardy was ill and sent a young enslaved boy to fetch the local doctor named George Douglas. But when the boy arrived at Douglas's home, he was in a state of panic and shock, begging the doctor to be allowed to stay the night so that he would not have to face what he had just encountered on his journey there. The boy then told the man that as he traveled from his home at Hardy Plantation, he heard the sound of a terrible howl from behind him in the dark of the night. And when he quickly turned to see the origin of the sound, he saw an enormous white hound stalking him. Frightened, he urged his mule to move faster and faster, but the hound trailed him all the way to Douglas's house. Dr. James Cofield, a prominent resident of Newberry County who lived in the region until his death in 1888, also claimed to have had numerous encounters with this ghostly hound. Cofield frequently traveled the area to treat his patients, accompanied by his own dog. Yet time and time again, when he passed through that same stretch of Old Bumcombe Road, Cofield's dog became afraid and agitated. And even on occasions when the man saw nothing, his pet would often abandon him out of fear and rejoin him further down the path. But of all those who claimed to encounter this apparition, legend says that the men who were responsible for the death of the salesman were the true targets of the Ghost Hound's vengeance. Several of these men were viciously attacked by the spirit hound, one crippled by it and another surviving the attack with a mauled hand. It is said that during each of these incidents, the hound was impervious to injury and gunfire, and that it shrugged off absolutely every physical attempt to stop it. And then, once the hound had completed his vengeance, he simply melted away into the dark of the woods. Over the years, numerous other apparitions linked to the ghostly hound have been reported. Some who have visited the site of the salesman's grisly hanging claim to have encountered the putrid smell of death emanating from the tree, while others have been confronted with the apparition of the man's body still hanging there, his massive white hound still standing guard. In addition, many of the purported sightings have also come from visitors to the Ebenezer Cemetery. Author Nancy Roberts, who's been described as the first lady of American folklore, included this tale in her 1962 work, Ghosts of the Carolinas.
There are many varying accounts. The ghost dog may leap through a closed iron gate and disappear, or it may spring out from a thicket along the road. Horses and mules along this road often behave as if they are badly frightened, much to the bewilderment of their drivers. For it is not unusual for animals, with their acute senses, to be first aware of the hound's peculiar presence. And if you should decide on a pleasant evening to take a horseback ride along the old road, and your steed rears back violently, or the hair along your dog's back raises, you would do well to beware the Hound of Goshen, for he is there.
The story of the Ghost Hound of Goshen was maintained predominantly as oral history well into the 1960s, and Nancy Roberts' Ghosts of the Carolinas is likely the first time that the tale was published. Other references to the legend can be found in local newspapers. A 1965 edition of Greenwood, South Carolina's The Index Journal reported on a local event that described the Hound of Goshen as a, quote, spook of Union County. Later, a 1967 edition of the Gaffney Ledger included an article titled Union County's Ghosts. The article described the legend of the Ghost Hound as, quote, one of the most unusual ghost stories. In a 2018 interview with South Carolina's ETV, a public broadcasting network, Ernest Sheely reported that he had personally known of the legend since his early childhood, but there are several inconsistencies between local lore and reality. Most notably, he states that the original road in the tale is no longer in existence in the form that it once was. So the addition of the Ebenezer Cemetery as a place of interest is likely due to the fact that it is home to the grave of Dr. George Douglas, who was mentioned in the initial sighting of the hound in 1855. In addition, the cemetery itself was likely linked to the lore to make it more easily locatable for legend hunters. Sheely agrees that there may be truth to the century-old tale, but it has become, quote, all tied up in folklore, so the truth of the Ghost Hound of Goshen may never be known. Yet the legend remains, and for those who have found themselves in this isolated part of the Sumter National Forest at night, these inconsistencies in the tale mean little compared to the terror of coming face to face with the vicious and vengeful Ghost Hound of Goshen. My name is Brandon Scheck-Snyder, and you've been listening to Southern Gothic.
Southern Gothic is an independently released podcast, written and produced by Brandon and Brianne Scheck-Snyder. For special access to members-only content, including access to the series Southern Gothic, The Monsters, as well as updates and links to our social media, visit southerngothicmedia.com today.
Lucky Little Shacks.